Hi, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue our discussion on Dungeons & Dragons. I was talking to you about the multiverse and kind of what you need to know both as a Dungeon Master and a player. Let's talk about a couple more places, the Feywild and Shadowfell. Let's talk about Feywild, the land of Fey, the plane of eternal twilight. Is the plane of fairies, where it is a kind of shadowy realm of great beauty and death and music and kind of fading lights, where it is eternally a setting sun there, that it always seems wherever you are, the sun is setting, and it kind of gives this kind of twilight feel to the entire area. Is where the Seelie Fae rule the summer court over much of the Fey realm. The Feywild mirrors the material plane, that you will find the landmarks and landscapes there that are similar. You will find these landmarks in the same place in the Feywild, but unlike its counterparts, it is more fantastic and different than what you'd think it would be. It has this almost magical and fantastical ways that it takes on different aspects to it that make it unique to the Feywild. So yes, you may know your way around generally, but like a craggy rock face might have epic architecture built into it to begin with. Now, it is of course the inhabitants of the Fey, but there are more darker, more malevolent forces that exist there within the Feywild. There are two main types of Fey, two groups of them, the Unseelie and the Seelie Fae. Each of them gives their fealty to one of the two queens of the Feywild. Now, there are Fey crossings in both the Feywild and the material plane that actually mirror each other, that if you find these locations, they look exact mirrors of each other in each of the realms. What they effectively are is a portal that you very well could just walk across this area or enter into this area and somehow pass from the material plane into the Feywild without even noticing it sometimes whatsoever. They are like magical enchanted places within the material plane that have, as I said, they're mirror exactly in the Feywild. If one of them should change in any way, then the connection is lost completely, that they have to remain this sort of mirror to each other. Now, granted, you might go there and it might not be a time period or it might not be the right conditions for the portal to be open. You never know. Just finding one of these places doesn't mean you'll necessarily enter the Feywild. You have to find out how to exactly enter through that specific Fey crossing. Now, there are some optional rules that you can use fairy magic, or the effects of fairy magic when it comes to players entering and exiting the Feywild. The first one, of course, is that when a non-Fey or non-Fey blooded creature should leave the Feywild, they are affected by a kind of curse that hits them. As I said, the Fey and the Fey blooded creatures, they're unaffected by this, so elves would be fine. But when you're leaving, you have to make a wisdom saving throw DC 10. If you fail it, you forget your entire time within the Feywild. You don't remember anything at all. You were there, but you're like, well, you don't even remember you were really there. You're like, I went through the portal and then some stuff happened and I don't remember any of that stuff and I'm back now. If you succeeded, even then it's sort of this hazy blur of what actually happened there, and you'd have to use some kind of curse removing magic in order to regain those memories. Either way, the curse removing magic would work, even if you failed or made your saving throw. Now, there is also the possibility of time working differently with the Feywild. It can when you enter into it, and you never know if it will when you enter it, if it's going to affect you. So you'd kind of roll in this chart and see how the time warp would affect you. And of course, you go in, when you'd leave, you would have been affected by the time warp. That time in the Feywild will pass either slower or faster than it would have been in the material plane. You never know which it's going to be. You can use a wish spell to prevent this from affecting you, or preventing a number of folks entering into the Feywild. Another option would be possibly to do some kind of task for a powerful Fey that may be able to use what equivalent would be to a wish, that when you'd enter the Feywild, you'd be unaffected too. So there is two options. Normally, if you go to the powerful Fey, they will put you under some kind of chaos that you'd have some kind of quest that you're going to have to do to complete for them in order to earn their sort of reward of being able to travel to the Feywild without worrying about the time warping. Now let's move on and talk about Shadowfell, or the Plane of Shadows. Now, Shadowfell is a plane of black, white, and gray. It is a plane of both sort of the ebbing light and darkness, because it is quite the shadows. Darkness permeates much of it, but it is not an encompassing factor there because it is shadows, and you need some kind of light. Though many things that enjoy the gloom or live in the darkness live in this place. It, again, like the Feywild, is a sort of twisted reflection of the material plane, but in this case, it is kind of sharp, twisted, kind of almost corrupted areas where you'd find a landmark and it would not be recognizable in the way you'd think it would be. Forests are like spiky, twisty, tangling roots that are very dangerous to pass through. It is a very horrible place. Shadow dragons and undead particularly like there. And as I said, anything that lives in the gloom will also enjoy being within the Shadowfell. Like with the Feywild and their Fey crossings, there are shadow crossings, places within the material plane that almost mirror places within the Shadowfell you can cross into. Oftentimes these are related to the boundaries between life and death. There could be some kind of battlefield you'll find it in, or a graveyard. There's an open grave that if you pass the grave you'd find yourself in there. So it has this connotations of, both death and life exist in these places. Now, within the Shadowfell, you will find demi-planes that exist, places sort of separated out from the rest of the world. This is where you find Barovia and Castle Ravenloft, ruled over by Strahd von Zurich, the powerful Dark Lord of Ravenloft. He is in one of these demi-planes. Within the Shadowfell, there are these dark powers that effectively can imbue these creatures and make them into dark lords, and they find these demi-planes and effectively imprison them in there for whatever their twisted reason is. And oftentimes when they imprison these dark lords, they take a large amount of mortals, as if like torturing these mortals at the hands of these dark lords is really their purpose, but it's really hard to tell. But these demi-planes, as I said, are more than prisons than anything, and they are the demi-planes of dread. Now, like with the Feywild, there's an optional rule here. There's the Shadowfell Dread. When you are within the Shadowfell for a period of time, at most once a day, you would make a check to see if you're affected by a dread. So at very most it would be once a day, but it could be greater lengths of time depending on what you're doing within the Shadowfell. You would make a DC 10 wisdom saving throw, and if you fail it, you get effectively a dread from one of the list. If you succeed it, you're fine. You can wait until another date or another time period in order to make it again. You would roll a D6 and you'd be affected by that despair. As an optional rule, a GM could come up with their own despair and assign it to you instead. Now, these despairs, should you be once again affected by despair, it would replace the old one. So you couldn't get multiple despairs. If you're affected by despair again, you're replacing the old one. If you have a long rest, you can make a DC 15 wisdom saving throw in order to overcome the despair. It's much harder to overcome this despair once it's settled in. Calm emotions or any kind of spell that would remove curses would remove the despair from you. So that's it for today. I talked about the two echoes of the material plane. The Feywild, the land of fays and the sort of magical twilight place, and the Shadowfell, the plane of shadows, this kind of dark place where some of the dark energies of the world seem to kind of congregate and mimic it in its own echoing form. In the next episode, I will talk to you about the inner planes, the elemental planes, and go over them and a little bit of information about fire, air, water, and earth planes. So if you have any questions, comments, anything to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel, the Empire, and the work I do. And if you want to show some extra support, you can check out my Patreon, link in the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.